Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Juria. Winterfell was just as he remembered it. He had visited it first with his father, years before Robert's rebellion, but he remembered it best from the great ride south to avenge the deaths of Rickard and Brandon Stark. He hadn't fought for Robert Baratheon. He'd fought to gain vengeance for the old Lord of the North and his oldest son brutally murdered by the Mad King. He remembered the Trident, the place where men had scrabbled for the rubies in the water after the death of the Mad Prince, and the stink of King's Landing after that. And he remembered that shining moment at Pike, the moment the wall crumbled under the impact of Great Trebuchet to create the breach, and the sprint into it. Fueled by rage and hate for those iron-born scum, Thoros of Myr to one side with his blazing sword, Saye Lannister not too far away, and Jory Castle on the other side, with more screaming at his back. He always wondered if it had been Meryn Greyjoy who had been the one who had confronted him first. He knew that Balon Greyjoy's second son had been there on the other side of the breach, but had he been the one in the chainmail with the sword, or the other one in the boiled leather armor with the axe? He'd been knighted that day. Yeah, a follower of the old gods anointed as a knight. And after that, Lannister. He forced his thoughts away from his estranged wife and looked about Winterfell again. The broken tower had scaffolding about it, draped with what looked like oilcloth against the rain, and the top did not look as broken as it once had. Oh, and he tried not to look at the people who were darting cold and angry glances at him. Others were refusing to even look at him. Jory Castle was one of them. As he led the Kingslayer away, his eyes slid over Jorah as if he didn't even exist. Part of him wanted to shrivel with shame. Another part wanted to run. But the stubborn bastard within him also wanted to shout that he was atoning, that he had earned his pardon, that he was sorry but that he had answered the call. Lyra had done off to talk to someone about their quarters, and he thanked the old gods that he had her. She kept his feet on the ground. If only she had been his wife instead of Lannister. As he shrugged internally and then watched with a half-smile as the boy Gendry made his way unerringly to the smithy of Winterfell, a hand suddenly landed on his shoulder and then pulled him back so hard that he hit the wall behind him with a grunt of pain. As his head rang from the impact, he shook it for an instant, and then he froze. Father was standing in front of him. He was dressed in black, looked older than ever, had a beard that was now mostly white instead of mostly gray. But it was Father. He also had a raven on one shoulder, and a look of... He wasn't sure what it was. A look of... It combined rage with bafflement, with pride. I don't know what I should do, Father said, before he could say a word. Part of me wants to knock you down, spit on you, and then denounce you for dragging the name of Mormont through the mud by dealing with slavers. But then part of me wants to hug you for answering the call from across the other side of the narrow sea. I had to come back, Jorah muttered. The call, I felt it in my bones. His father seemed to quiver for a moment before sighing. By the old gods, Jorah, what were you thinking? I needed coin. I was a fool. Aye, that you were. To take a Hightower as a wife after your first wife died. I knew that it wouldn't end well. Where is she? Lysak. Coin outweighed love after I fled into exile, and she can stay there. She's concubine to another man now. His father sighed again and placed a hand on the pommel of his sword. Jorah stared at it, plain pommel. Terror ran through him. Father, you're not wielding Longclaw. Please tell me that you got it after I left it behind. Something new flickered in Father's eyes. Something that might have been approval. I got it. Wielded it at the wall for years. But Mage came to Castle Black with the rest of the Lords of the North, and I decided that Daisy should have it. She's worthy of it. He thought about his lanky younger cousin and then nodded reluctantly. Ah, she is. Father stared at him for a long moment. Right, he said eventually. You and I are going to have a little talk about a few things. He sighed as Father dragged him towards a door. Hopefully he should get through this without too many clouds across the back of his head. Jon Arryn. Merryweather was still talking cheerfully about the improvement in the crown's finances, and he nodded along with the others in satisfaction. Keturbai had lied a lot about so very many things, and now things were back on a more even keel. As Merryweather ended his report, Montford Velaryon, the new master of ships, leaned forwards and started to speak. The Lord of Driftmark was not his first choice for the role. Sir Davos Seaworth was worth 10 of the Bloody Man, but he was competent and above all loyal. They would need loyal men soon. As Valerian spoke, he listened with one ear, but mulled over other affairs, even as he nodded, as the words rumbled past him. Gods, but he was tired of this. He'd been doing it for far too long. The Eyrie called. The realm still looked to King's Landing despite the absence of Robert. News of his trip to the north took time to spread, so still the ravens came with their short messages and the riders with their far larger ones. And for every great matter of state there was always 100, no, 1,000 lesser ones. One lord saw justice against another for some tiny slight. One lord saw vengeance against another for some land being stolen, or merchandise purloined. There were almost times when he preferred those lesser things to the thornier of the larger ones, though. Like the one that was facing the small council. Well, the smaller council, as Reimagined kept calling it. Right now, as Reimagined himself started to speak, Hoster Tully had sent a raven saying that the unrest involving the Faith Militant was dying down, as he now had one of the major contributors to it under lock and key at Reborn, some mad septon called Blackfoot, or Sparrow, or something. Apparently the man was raving mad, had mysteriously gone blind and kept soiling himself. Hoster wanted to shorten the wretched man by a head, but wanted some instruction from King's Landing first, like the canny old trout that he was. As far as Jon was concerned, his good father should drop the wretch into the nearest river, which wouldn't be hard at River Run, but there were other issues at work here. He needed to talk to the new High Septon about this. It was a shame that Castley was back at Foxhold. He had a good line in bright and cheery smiles as he played with crossbows. Well, Quill would do just as well. Have Lord Tully execute the wretched man and be done with it. Merryweather spat as a silence fell. He deserves it. Yes, I fully agree, my lord, but surely we need to hear the thoughts of the High Septon. Pycelle wheezed in a manner that made him seem to be the old fool that he pretended to be. From the account sent in by Lord Tully, we have more than enough information to order his death 3 times over. Jon replied in a voice like iron, raising men who bore the banner of the Faith Militant, leading men against Ser Edmure as he sought to defend High Heart, and, above all, trying to get to the Isles of Faces to burn it to the ground. That last one alone would be enough to earn a death penalty. That place is sacrosanct, as agreed by kings and lords before even the conquest. It was possible that Pycelle muttered the word heathen nonsense under his breath, but Jon wasn't entirely sure. The other lords, however, nodded in agreement at Jon's words. Agreed, Renly sighed. I will talk with the High Septon, but the decision of this small council is that the man who calls himself the High Sparrow must die. Aye, Jon said, and the others followed his lead, even Pycelle. He looked about the table. Is there any other business? Before he could adjourn the meeting and have a long overdue word with Rexley in the next room, a fist hammered against the door. He looked over with a sigh and scowl. Come. The door opened to reveal Quill, who bowed and then approached the table. Your pardon, my lords, but a man of the Night's Watch has arrived from Castle Black to address the small council. Jon peered at his faithful servant. He looked pale, almost green, and he seemed to be shaking slightly. From Castle Black, Quill? Aye, my lord, Quill replied shakily. A message that must be seen to be believed. Viers frowned. Seen, Master Quill. Aye, my lord, seen. There was a moment of quiet confusion in the room, and then Jon nodded. Very well. Send him in. When Quill re-entered, he was leading a man in worn and travel-stained black clothing. He was holding a square object in both hands that was covered in black cloth, which he held in front of him as if it was something terrible. As he approached the table, he paused to bow hastily. My lords, I am Dennis Hollern of the Night's Watch, and I bear, a token of proof from Castle Black. Varys raised an eyebrow at the man. Proof of what? Exactly. Hollern gulped. What we face, my lord. He placed the object on the table in front of him. This is from Lord Commander Mormont. He wants the small council to know what is marching on the wall. There was a pause as everyone looked from the object to Hollern and then back to the object. Finally reached out and jerked the black cloth from it. It was a cage made from some kind of odd metal, and inside sat the severed head of a woman. Jon stared at it. This made no sense whatsoever. He was about to ask what in the 7 hells this was all about when, all of a sudden, ice seemed to spread down his back, as the head opened its very blue eyes and hissed at them all, before gnashing broken teeth. Merryweather and Valerian jerked back in their seats so violently that they came close to falling over. Pycelle also recoiled, but not as badly. Whilst Renly froze in place, his eyes very wide indeed, Somehow John willed himself to just stare at the horrible, impossible thing. "What?" he said eventually through very dry lips. "Is that?" "The head of a white, my lord," Hollern answered. "The others are animating dead bodies north of the wall. The call is true." There was a long moment of silence in the room, and then it erupted with shouted questions from every man but Varys, who just sat there, his eyes flickering in what John knew to be deep thought. Gendry, the smith of Winterfell, was a man called Mikken, who had, much to his surprise, heard of him. "Word traveled ahead of you," he said, as he eyed Gendry carefully. "Lords have ravens. Blacksmiths have those who travel on the roads. Merchants. Smithing supplies. Apprentices seeking work. Aye, I've heard of you. Gendry Strong-Arm Storm, natural son of his grace the king. Not a bad blacksmith from what I've heard." Gendry felt his ears go warm. "Just an apprentice," he muttered. "So you say," Mikken said wryly. "Right, there's a smithing apron over there and a hammer. There's a few things I need help on." And so he'd buried himself back into smithing work. His life had been truly odd these past months, but the feeling of the heat of the forge and the sensation of hammering on metal was real in a way that some things had not been. He made a trio of hoes and then a dagger, before starting on something more complex. It was like the head of a halberd, only it had large tines at its base. He puzzled over this for a moment or two as he worked on it, and then he realized, "It's for fighting whites, isn't it?" Mikken, who had been working on one of his own, grunted with approval. "You're right. What made you realize it?" "I saw the head of a white in a cage on the way here. Made me think about how you fight. A dead man that walks, a spear will go straight through him, and he'll keep walking towards these times. They'll hit ribs and stop him dead." The Northman smiled and nodded. "Aye, you have the right of it. You saw it faster than my apprentice." He smiled and kept at it, one halberd and then another. It was only then that he realized that they had company. There was a quartet of solemn faces at the door. Shireen was there, with 3 boys all about the same age. "This is Gendry," Shireen said with a scowl. "He's a blacksmith, and a forge is a dangerous place, and you are all to do what he says, all right? He's my cousin, and he's nice, but he wants to keep people safe in a forge, and we need to do what he says." The 3 boys nodded almost in unison, and then sat down in a line at her direction. When they were in place, she looked at him. "This is Brandon Stark, and Robert Arryn, and Edric Storm. They heard about you and wanted to come and pester you, so I have taken them in hand." She smiled at him, glared at them, which made them all flinch a little, and then look back at him. "Edric's your half-brother, by the way." Gendry faltered in mid-stroke before recovering. Yes, the boy at the end had black hair and blue eyes and the look of his father. "Edric, yeah." The boy nodded slowly. "Are you my half-brother?" "I am. We share a father." "Why are you a blacksmith?" He shrugged. "I just am. I was apprenticed as a boy in King's Landing." Edric nodded. "I was brought up at Storm's End. My mother is of House Florent." Gendry rolled his shoulders. "My mother wasn't highborn at all." He hammered on the halberd head a bit more. "Do you want to be a blacksmith?" "No, but this forge is amazing." "And dangerous," Shireen broke in, with a glare that made all 3 boys quail a bit. "Very dangerous. Forges are not a place for people to just wander in." She paused. "Is father's knife ready yet?" He grinned at that, before placing the halberd to one side, and then pulling out the knife that he had been working on, and handing it over to her. "For your lord father." Shireen looked at it from all angles, and then she grinned and embraced him. "It's perfect, Gendry. Thank you so much." He smiled at her again, before picking his hammer up again, and returning to the halberd. "Let me know what Uncle Stannis says about it, Robert." He looked at the map again as Ned talked with Stannis and Maester Luwin about messages. When he heard the sound of departing feet, he looked at the doorway in time to see Stannis and the Maester leave clutching messages. As they left, the huge form of Ned's direwolf padded in and then sat next to Ned's chair. It looked at him with its head to one side and then huffed almost in welcome before it turned its head and looked at Stormbreaker. Again a tilt of the head and a huff before those disconcertingly intelligent eyes returned to him. "She's very protective of you, Ned." "And I of her. All Starks used to have dire wolves once. They were a link to the old gods. I don't know when that link was broken. I don't even remember the night that it was restored. The old gods possessed me to do that." He stared at Ned. "The old gods possessed you, like they possessed Shireen?" From what I was told, her eyes burned with red fire. "Apparently so did mine," Ned replied dryly. I don't remember a bloody thing, but apparently I led a party of men from Winterfell in the dead of night to a forgotten godswood in the Wolfwood, where I summoned her. She was heavy with pups, and now all my children have one, even Theon Greyjoy. He gaped a little at that, but then rallied. I saw the squiddling. How's the brat doing? Ned raised his eyebrows for a moment. I might have turned him into a Stark. His own father virtually ignored him growing up, and the boy's been affected by quite a bit here. He's turned his back on the drowned god for a start. He worships the old gods now. He had some very odd dreams a few months back. Walked into the hall where we break our fast with a wound on his face. One morning, something with rotted fingernails had slashed at him. He said that he had dreamt about his dead brother Roderick. Something cold seemed to waft through him for an instant, and he shivered. Gods, that sounds ominous. Aye, but later he had a dream where what was left of his brother tried to drag him before the drowned god. He refused and appealed to the old gods. The wound vanished, and the boy has a heart tree medallion that appeared from nowhere. Knows he of the North now. He doesn't want to be a Greyjoy, says that his father's a fool. Greystark's a name of ill fortune in the North, so he's thinking about Greymas perhaps. He might seek you out. Talk to him, Robert. He's not his father. He brooded over this for a moment, and then laughed shortly. Gods, I'd like to see the look on the face of old Balin when he hears that his last remaining son has disowned him. He looked at Ned. You've heard of the fighting on the Iron Islands? Aye, I have. Balin Greyjoy is all but at war with Roderick Harlaw. Last Raven spoke of more than that. I might need to send someone there to bash some heads together. Stannis would do it, but he might enjoy it too much. He'd also say, I told you so, to me too many times before he left. He sniffed. He was right, though. I should have hammered Balin fucking Greyjoy's head flatter than a pancake, burnt Pike to the ground, and put the reader in charge of the pack of raping idiots. Ned sighed, but then nodded. It might have been better in the long run. I always knew that Balin Greyjoy was an idiot, but the years have somehow removed wisdom from his mind, instead of increasing it. He nodded a little in reply, and then peered at his old friend. By the way, how bad were things at the Wall before this alliance you struck with the wildlings? Nod flared his nostrils for a moment in that way he had whenever he thought of something unpleasant. Worse than in my worst nightmares. The Watch was down to 3 castles, as I said, weaker than they had ever been. The wildling raids were bad and getting worse, almost by the day. I was close to calling my banners and marching to the Wall to defend it, and yes, I would have sent you a raven. I'd never deny you the chance to dent some skulls. I knew that there was a war coming, Ned. I felt it in my bones, Robert muttered. I didn't know where or when, but I knew it was coming. So how many times had young Robb been at the Wall then, finding things out for you? Ned blinked at him, confused. That was his first time there. He peered at Ned again and then snorted. Oh, come on, Ned. That boy of yours has seen more of war than just a couple of skirmishes. I could see it in his eyes. Young face, old eyes. Something odd happened to Ned's face at that point. A shiver of emotion flashed over it like lightning. He said tiredly. I know. I told you that the old gods had spoken through a few people. Well, they spoke or rather acted through him too. He fell silent for a moment, and Robert could tell that Ned was struggling with something. I said that this all started with a message from the old gods. Well, Robb witnessed that message, but as what he saw, you'd never believe me. Come off it, Ned, he protested. You know that I would. No, Ned replied with an odd look to his face again. You wouldn't. Not without proof. It's a long and odd and very terrible tale to tell, and besides, it's his tale and not mine to tell. You'll hear of it, I promise you. But not just yet. Robert cast an uncertain look at Ned, but then nodded. Speaking of family, there's something else I'd like to speak to you about. We should have been good brothers many years ago, you and I. If Lyanna had lived, I would have married her. We still can be good brothers. I want to join our 2 houses. Your Sansei with my Joffrey. Ned's eyebrows flew up for a moment. I would be honored, he replied carefully. But there's a problem. Sansa's already betrothed. Damn it, Robert said a little crossly. Who to? Can it be quashed? Domeric Bolton, Rose Bolton's only son. Bugger it. His own eyebrows went up and down. Oh, I remember Rose Bolton. Any man with the banner of a flayed man sticks in the mind, but that quiet little bugger always gave me the willies, and I don't say that lightly. You'd betroth your daughter to the son of that man? Ned tilted his head to one side slightly. Demeric's not like his father. He was fostered in the Vale at the Red Fort. You can ask Lord Redford himself what he thinks about the lad. I'll be talking to him later myself. Him and Bronzione Royce. They need to talk to me before tonight's feast. But back to Demeric, he's not his father, and he's certainly nothing like his mad half-brother. I heard about him on the road up. Mad doesn't seem to begin to describe him. Aye, well, Ramsay Snow's dead and buried. No, Demeric has sworn to treat my daughter as I would expect him to. And he swore that oath on the Fist of Winter. People who swear on that and lie, well, you saw the head on the spike at the main gate. Sir Willem Boodle, who tried to cheat my cousin Lady Surestone out of her birthright. He placed a hand on the fist and swore that he did not murder Dacey's father. Next thing I know, the man's flying through the air, stone dead. He looked at Ned and then at the mace. Bloody hells, that's useful and frightening. These things, your sword and my mace, are old, Robert. Very old. Who knows what else they can do? It was a good point, but he still limped back and scowled a bit. This marriage with the Boltons, important? Demeric's the only remaining son. There's some cousins that came over with the Company of the Rose. You'll need to meet them, as I said, but Demeric's the heir. The Boltons are important in the north, Robert. And the betrothal has been announced. I can't break it easily. Even for my king, the North needs to be united for this war. Robert, damn it, Ned was right. He nodded reluctantly, and then Ned added, and the two are in love. Sansa and Demeric have been making plans like redesigning the banner of the Boltons. Damn it again. In love, are they? Young love? I wouldn't have Lyanna's niece be unhappy. A shame, she might be the making of my eldest. But I won't press for the betrothal to be broken, Ned. So stop squinting at me like that. Right, my Tommen and your Arya. Ned eyed him with a twinkle in his eye. Is he tough?
Man.
Heiress like Lyanna. It doesn't surprise me at all that she's been sneaking out and getting sword lessons. She's refusing to take embroidery lessons, by the way. Says that it makes more sense to learn to fight alongside the men if a second long night is coming. He thought of Tommen, his sweet, cat-addled boy, married to the reincarnation of Lyanna. The poor lad, he said dazedly. Well, it might make him as well. We'll talk about it. That, or Myrcella and your Bran. They're of an age, are they not? Ned seemed to go into a reverie for a moment. Aye, he said, eventually. One of those might work. We'll discuss it. Good, he smiled, and then he sobered. Right then, we've talked of business and duty long enough. Take me to your crypts, Ned. I need to pay my respects to your sister. John Arryn. From the very top of the Tower of the Hand, a man could see a long way into Blackwater Bay. A very long way. He stared at the water on the horizon. It looked peaceful, placid, sparkling blue. A classic summer's day here in King's Landing. But he didn't feel warm, he felt cold. So very cold. Ned had always been right. Winter was coming for the north, for the Vale, for all of Westeros. He sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. The small council had broken up in near chaos. Lyanna had gone off, muttering about consulting the records at Driftmark. Merryweather had just staggered off, looking stunned. T-Cell had left in the general direction of his ravens with a remarkably straight back, whilst Varys had rubbed his hands together and muttered that he might have to make some inquiries in certain places personally. Knuckles rapped on the doorframe to one side and he turned to it. Come in, Renly. Rosierly Baratheon walked in. He was missing quite a bit of his usual, well, swagger. This time he came in almost hesitantly. He smiled at Jon and then joined him at the window. A strange place, King's Landing, Renly sighed. It changes your viewpoint. Everyone looks to this place for leadership, but everyone in this bloody place is busy obsessing over what happens within the walls sometimes. It takes something horribly serious like the head of a white to kick people out of that viewpoint. Take me for example. I went with Robert to Storm's End. I was there with him when he found Stormbreaker. I saw a statue, a bloody statue, Jon, come to life with fire in its eyes, and give Robert that sword, and proclaim him Storm King. But within days of returning to this bloody place, I'd half forgotten it all. No, various lords needed a favor, various knights needed patronage, always the usual fuss and bother and churn of plots, for want of a better word. In a place like King's Landing, you get obsessed with all of that. It was a good point, and he sighed. I know, all this talk of the Call, all this business with the Isle of Faces, that was the start of this chill wind that blew the head of that white in. And yes, I know exactly what you mean. This poisonous place makes minor things seem more important than things that are more important outside the walls. Well, no more. The head will be displayed in the throne room, next to that wretched iron throne for a week. I talked to the man of the Night's Watch. He said that other parts were already on the way south, so he's willing to tarry here for a week. Do you think that Robert has seen any of those parts? If Ned is dealing with this call, then I am certain of it. Who knows what else he might have in the way of proof? Reinsley shuddered for a long moment and then sighed a little. I'll make sure that every Stormlord in King's Landing sees it. Where will the head be going to next? Storm's End. Good. Then I'll accompany it. The Stormlands need to know what's coming. Jon nodded, and then he pointed to the chair to one side. Sit down, Rensley. I need to talk to you about something else. He waited until Rensley sat with a slight frown. You need to marry, and soon. Rosia Wesley stared at him, and then he laughed. Marry? It is a little early for that, surely. He resisted the temptation to clutch at his forehead. Rosierly, you are past 20 now. Robert was betrothed by your age. So was I. You are the Lord of Storm's End and Lord Paramount of the Stormlands. People expect it of you. A wife and a child show that you are a strong and stable lord, founding a dynasty that will secure the Stormlands to the crown for the next generation and more. Rensley shifted uncomfortably. I will admit that various lords have hinted at matters, but Jon, there is plenty of time for this, and... There is less time than you think. Jon snapped the words out, before holding up a hand in apology. Rosalie, what I am about to tell you must stay a secret. I know that you have been corresponding with the Tyrells. You cannot tell them this yet. Tell me what? House Baratheon is not as stable, nor as large as you think it is. He sighed and walked over with the book that he had placed on the table next to him. In the past, every Baratheon who married a Lannister went on to have children that had black hair and blue eyes. Every time, why is it that Robert's children have golden hair and green eyes then? Rensley stared at him, and then at the page that Jon had opened. The book too. The great houses of Westeros had its uses, even if it was very heavy. What are you saying? Robert has a number of bastards. They all have black hair and blue eyes, and resemble him in some way or another. Why then is there nothing of him in Joffrey Tommen and Myrcella? By now, Rensley was doing an excellent impression of a landed fish, his eyes wide and his mouth open. Eventually, he rallied a little. Then, if you are right, who is the father? Jon pulled a face. The Kingslayer. Yes, her own brother. I have found a few servants who confirmed that they have seen Cersei in secluded locations within the Red Keep in the company of her brother. One even said that she had seen the two embrace and kiss. I am keeping them guarded. I have a bad feeling that those servants who were said to have run away were in fact those who saw too much and were silenced by them. Reasonably just sat there, stunned. Then, Stennis is really the heir? Aye, he knows that too. That trip to Winterfell, then, does Robert know? Not yet. A shadow flashed over Rensley's face for an instant. He'll kill her the moment he finds out. You know that, don't you? Hopefully he'll listen to Ned. Does Ned know? I don't know. He did warn me about a possible Lannister plot against me some months back. At about the time that I sent young Robert to Foster with Ned. If he does not know, then Stannis will tell him. There will be a reckoning, though, and when that happens, Tywin Lannister will be furious and humiliated. So we must be united on this. Whatever happens with Cersei, Robert will be without a wife, and also an heir. Now, he might legitimize one of his bastards, but this will be the greatest crisis to face us since the Greyjoy Rebellion. So now you see why you must marry. Again, a shadow flashed across the face of the younger man. Jon, he said hesitantly, you say that so easily, but I know that things are complicated for you. I know that you have feelings for Loras Tyrell, your squire. Red spots blossomed on Renly's cheeks. Jon, he forestalled him by holding up a hand. Rensley, do you really think that you are the first man I have met who had feeling for other men? I am an old man, and I have seen a lot in my life, including lords who were fond of their squires. Now, there are ways around this. My mother had a cousin who had something. Well, similar. This was proving to be as difficult as he had thought it would be. Put simply, we find you a wife who is understanding about such things. Some girl of kind disposition and gentle heart who knows that you have affections for a man. And as to the matter of an heir, Well, the maesters have certain potions that, well, can assist on getting matters to arise, so to speak. The redness had now taken over the entire face of Renly Baratheon. He also looked as if he had aged a decade in a moment. Jono, how did you know? Really, I am not a fool. You thought that you were being careful in public, but as I said, I am an old man now, and I have seen much in my life. There was a silence. Then others know? Perhaps. Some might have guessed. So maybe. Another silence. Gods. I wondered if perhaps some of my storm lords were a little less effuse in their greetings of late. Rosalie, we can deal with this. As I said, a girl of kind disposition for a wife. He laid a hand on Renly's shoulder. My boy, as I said, this is not something that is unknown to me. There is precedent. Lords and knights that I have known, do not look so worried. I will keep this a secret. We need to all stand together as much as possible. Let me know if you need to talk to me. And Renly, do not tell the Tykras about this situation involving Cersei. I will be writing to Willis Tykrill myself by a secret way that cannot be intercepted. Renly nodded. Thank you, Jon, he said quietly. Thank you for your counsel on this. As he stood, Jon looked at him. Anytime, Renier. As I said, you can speak to me about this at any time. Renly nodded absently and then slipped out of the door. As he left, Jon looked after him, worriedly. He should have talked to Renly weeks ago. Too much to do, which just left one question. Who did he know who could help him to find a wife for Renly Baratheon? The Queen of Thorns, perhaps, he muttered as he stared out of the window again. No Lannisters, though. Never again. Ned. Robert's eyes were moist as he stared up at Lyanna's face. Did you have to bury her here, in a place like this? In all this darkness? Robert placed a winter rose at the base of the statue. She should be on a hilltop, with the sun above and the wind around her. This is where she belongs, Robert, Ned replied sadly. All Starks come here in the end. Brandon's here, along with whatever could be found of father. The statue makes her look like a staid lady. We both know she was never that. She was a she-wolf. My she-wolf. I know, Robert, he replied sadly. Unfortunately, the only way to do her justice would be to have a moving statue on a horse. Robert smiled wryly at this. I still say she belonged in the fresh air, but she was your sister. A Stark. I understand. All Starks come here in the end, Ned said again, before gesturing down the corridor to where a small candle could be seen. See that? We interred the ashes of Rickon Stark, son of Edwyle Stark. He was the half-white I told you off. Robert, he was born before the conquest. But Robb and Jon spoke with him, fought with him, and were with him when he died. All Starks come home, in the end. Robert looked at him and then sighed a little. I keep dreaming of her, Ned. Lyanna, she's in a forest full of white trees. She's trying to tell me something, but something else keeps pulling her away. Sartor Barristan tells me that Stormbreaker's linked to dreams, so you might be right about there being something about the weapons of the First Men that we need to understand better. The Selmies used to be the sword-bearers, or something like that to the Durrandons. Damn it, too much has been lost. They stood there for a long moment, staring at Lyanna's tomb, lit only by the candles by the tomb and the torches on the walls. I bloody hate sieges. Boring, bloody things. Never been on the defensive like this, though. How we will be. That is. I'll need to see the wall at some point, Ned. I know, he smiled wryly. It's bigger than you think. Robert snorted with amusement. Then he stopped. Do you think that your father knew that this might happen? He sighed. I did wonder. I don't know. Who knows how much warning we would have had if he had lived. Silence. If Rosier had never taken Lyanna, what do you think our lives would be like? Ned snorted a little. You'd be just a lord of the Stormlands, obviously. Father might still be alive. Brandon would be the heir. I'd just be the second son, in a keep of my own somewhere. Maybe Moat Cailin. I always wanted to be the one to rebuild it. I thought you already were. It was overdue. Who know, I would have married. Maybe Asha Idane. That would have been Brandon's. Lyanna would have been yours. And the old gods alone know how many bastards you and my brother would have had by now, he thought with a silent sigh. A longer silence, Ned. I can't tell you what kind of a husband I would have been to her. A good one, I hope. Gods, I loved her. And yes, I've always had a wandering eye, but I would have tried. I miss her, Ned. This marriage to Cersei, it was never about love. I wish Jon had never talked me into it. She's a poisonous bitch. Mother's Joffrey too much, and there's something wrong with that boy. He's an idiot. A cruel idiot. That's why I was hoping that your Sansa could make something of him. Tommen and Myrcella, though, they're sweet children. Whatever little I did right, I got that much right. He took a deep breath. Right, I have a log to find and some fat to sweat off. Gods, you should have seen me months ago. Fat. I got fat, Ned. But not anymore. And one more thing. I brought 2 of my bastards with me. Remember Maya? She came with Redfort and Royce. And there's Gendry. He likes being a smith, and he's bloody good with a hammer. Probably in your smithy right now. Wool gathering again. I need that log, and that's some sparring, so get your arse to the practice yard in an hour or so. And off he went. Ned watched his friends retreating back with a kind of wondering astonishment. Robert had changed, then he blanched a little. That meant that 3 of Robert's bastards were in Winterfell, at the same time as all 3 of his children. On the one hand, that made a comparison easier. On the other hand, it meant that there was a higher chance that someone might look and wonder out loud about the differences between the 2. He turned and strode out. He needed to find Stannis now and talk to him. Fortunately, it did not take long to find him. The Hand of the King had found the room that had been set aside for him beforehand and was reading a large number of messages. Ned nodded at the man in Baratheon colors at the entrance, walked in, and then cleared his throat. Lord Baratheon, we need to talk at once. Stannis eyed him for a moment, looked at the messages in front of him, made a notation, and then nodded. Corsleys, take these to Master Luwin at once, please, and close the door. Lord Stark and I are not to be disturbed. The man strode in, took the messages, nodded, and strode out again, closing the door behind him. Ned stepped forwards and gestured at the walls. We can talk safely in this room. I made sure. Now I know the truth about Robert's children with Cersei. As in they are not Robert's children, they are the Kingslayers. Stannis drew himself up to his full height. I know, but how do you know? The tricky part. It's hard to explain. I had intelligence of it, intelligence that is hard to explain. I also read my copy of The Great Houses of Westeros. And above all, having fostered Edric Storm, I know that it's more than passing odd that Robert's bastards have black hair and blue eyes, when his so-called legitimate children are all gold of hair and green of eye. There was the sound of teeth grinding from the direction of the Lord of Dragonstone. What intelligence! I do not think you would believe me if I told you. Lord Stark, the dead are marching on the wall, led by the others, and my daughter has been healed by the old gods themselves. Now, what intelligence? He stared at Stannis, assessed the situation, and then nodded. The old gods brought my oldest son Robb back from the dead. He has memories of a world where the call was never sent, where the Lannisters murdered Jon Arryn, where Robert came to Winterfell to persuade me to become Hand of the King, and where I agreed and went south, where Robert died in a hunting accident that could not have been an accident, and I discovered the incest, and was then betrayed and executed. Robb marched to avenge me. No one believed your claims at first, and something called the War of the Five Kings broke out. The 5 were Joffrey, you, Renly, Balon Greyjoy, as the king of the Iron Islands, and Robb as the king in the north and the Riverlands. Chaos, in other words. Chaos and folly. All while the dead marched on the wall. Robb's part in it all ended when he was betrayed and murdered himself. Stannis just stared at him, pale as milk. That, gods! He knew your son died. He did, and the old gods brought him back to the here and now, in time to make a difference. Jon Arryn lives. You and I can work together to expose Cersei's crimes. This war of the 5 kings, this war of madness, will never happen now. Stannis ran his tongue over what looked like very dry lips. Gods, Ned, your pardon, Lord Stark. Stannis, call me Ned. A wry twist of the lips. Very well then, Ned. Your son was brought back from a future that must never be. He seemed to absorb this, before licking his lips again and rallying. Do you have a plan? I do. Ever since I knew that Robert was coming here with Cersei, I have had a plan. What is it? Tonight there will be a feast. Tomorrow there will be a hunt in the Wolfswood. Robert will go, as will many of the lords. And then he explained the next part of his plan. Tyrion. Joxeley's reaction to Uncle Jurian's tale of how he found Brightroar was one of stupefied astonishment, followed what looked like a state of shock. He didn't even ask about seeing the Valyrian steel sword that had cost Tyrion so much to get. He just listened with his eyebrows climbing higher and higher until they had almost been in his hairline. And then he just sat there, staring into space. Uncle Tyrion had smiled a little at his reaction, whispered to Tyrion that he might have broken his brother a little, and then slipped out with his son. After a while, Jaime had returned to himself, his eyebrows coming down. "Well," he said, eventually, "I'd like to see Father's response to the return of Uncle Jerry." "So he found Brightroar." "He did." Jaime had then stared blankly ahead again and then left the library, muttering something about life getting odder by the day. Ah, his poor brother. If only he knew the things that he had seen on the wall. The wall. He had written a full account of what he had seen and done there for Father. Hopefully he'd be in the same room as Father when he read it. Father's face would have a fascinating array of expressions on it. He stared at the books and then sighed and closed them carefully. The mystery of the strange throne-like chair at the Night Fort would have to wait. It was intriguing, but he had no idea what it was, and as things stood, he needed more information. He pursed his lips a little as he waddled down the corridor. Winterfell was different these days, busier and more lively than it had been before, and it had hardly been quiet and staid before. As he reached the balcony that looked out over the courtyard, he wondered what the place had been like during the days when the king in the north had ruled from here. Right now, it was busy. The king's party had largely been absorbed into Winterfell, although he suspected that Wintertown had taken quite a bit. Even then, given by the work that was going on around the first keep, more space was needed. They were working on making parts of the ancient structure habitable and had pulled all the workers off the broken tower to do the work. At least the broken tower looked a lot less broken now from what he could see of it, as there was scaffolding all over it, some of which was shrouded with canvas. He looked down at the training yards to one side. Robb and Jon Stark were sparring with wooden dummies at the direction of the older castle. From the way they were fighting, they were practicing the kind of blows you'd direct at whites. Fighting things that were already dead and therefore not very skilled at swords meant dismemberment. Judging by the weighted practice swords they were using, they didn't want to use their Valyrian steel swords. He was still curious about how the bastard of Winterfell had gotten that blade. He moved to one side and then realized that the Starks were not alone. To one side was another set of dummies, where Theon Greyjoy and Aelarian were also practicing. And in the distance he could see Ciara Lysand, dressed in something more feminine than her recent disguise at the archery butts, practicing with a bow and arrow. She wasn't very accurate, but she looked grimly determined. Hearing feet to one side, he looked up and then suppressed a groan. Joffrey was standing there with the Hound to one side. Worse, Cersei was also there. She looked at him with that usual look of cool contempt, and then down at the training yards. "The mighty warriors of the north," she spat quietly, but derisively. Then she looked at him. "Jaime says that Uncle Gerion is alive, and here in Winterfell, or at least. That was what he muttered as he passed me just now. He can't be serious." "Oh, he's serious," Tyrion replied. "Uncle Gerion is indeed alive. Moreover, that's his son down there. The one next to Theon Greyjoy." Cersei and Joffrey peered at the lad, whilst the Hound looked supremely indifferent. "But that boy looks half as Yuzzy. Half Summer Islander, actually, a nice lad, and very close to his father." This last was information that left them cold, but Cersei directed a look that was very near to being a sneer at the boy. "So, Uncle Gerion's back," Cersei said. "Valyria didn't kill him, and he's been in the Summer Islands?" "He has. The shame he didn't find Brightroar. That might have almost cheered Father up." Tyrion smiled cheerily at her. "What makes you think that he didn't?" They both stared at him. "Brightroar has been found?" Cersei asked with a certain amount of asperity, mingled with disbelief. "It has. Uncle Gerion bears it. I've seen it. Brightroar." Joffrey smirked as he seemed to swell slightly with pomposity. "Mother, this is excellent news. When I am king, I will have not one famous sword, but two, and a Valyrian steel sword is better than that sky metal thing of Father's. I shall write to grandfather at once. So should you, Mother." This seemed to be a leap of logic that escaped him. "What?" Joffrey gave him a look that said that he thought that his uncle was a half-wit. "Brightroar goes to the head of House Lannister, which means grandfather. After that it goes to me. Grandfather is old, Uncle Jaime can't have it because he's in the King's Guard, and they can't have swords that are better than the King's sword. You can't have it because you're, well, you, so that just leaves me." That still made no sense whatsoever, and he was about to say so when he was forestalled. "No," said Uncle Geryon in a very cold voice as he stood in the doorway to one side. You are about as wrong in that as you can be. He strode forwards, his hand resting on the pommel of Braidroor, and bowed slightly to Cersei and Joffrey. Your Grace, my prince. Cersei stepped backwards with shock, and her hands flew to her mouth for a moment. But then she suppressed the shock and stepped forwards again, as poised as before. So formal, Uncle Geryon. So formal, yes. His knuckles whitened on the pommel of Braidroor. I have founded a new branch of House Lannister in the Summer Islands, and my brother will never have Braidroor. It's mine. It will be my son's sword after I die. I paid a stiff price for this sword. I earned it, and its previous owner gave it to me and me alone. It's mine, and then Alaryen's after I die. Joffrey had gone first pale and then red with fury. Braidroor is the property of House Lannister. It was held by the kings of the Westerlands. It belongs to grandfather, and then after him, to me. Why does this matter so much, nephew? Tyrion asked in an effort to calm the wretched brat. After all, you will have Stormbreaker in the fullness of time. Something odd happened to Joffrey's face at that point. Stormbreaker is amazing, he stammered. But Braidroor! It's been lost for so long. Longer than Stormbreaker. Aye, said Uncle Geryon, and now it has been found, and now it is mine. I paid a price for it. Grandfather will match that price, Joffrey cried eagerly, and Tyrion wanted to groan and place his face in his hands. Tyrion Lannister stiffened, his knuckles going even whiter on the pommel. And then he reached up and flipped his eye patch up to reveal the terrible scar that crossed the hole where his eye had once been. Can even Tywin Lannister match this price? Getting this sword cost me my eye, as you can see. More importantly, it also cost me the lives of a lot of my men who died because I was obsessed with this sword. Can he bring them back from the dead? Joffrey was as white as a sheet as he stared at that terrible empty eye socket, and then he shook his head before hurrying away, retching as he went. The Hound shrugged a little, his own terrible scar visible for a moment through that curtain of hair, and then followed more slowly, as if he was amused by the whole thing. As for Cersei, she was made from sterner stuff. She just stood a little straighter. I will write to father about this, she hissed. You have not heard the last of this matter. And then she stalked off. Tyrion watched her go, before turning to Tyrion, who had replaced his eye patch and was now watching the others practice. That might have gone better, Uncle. Tyrion turned slightly, and an odd look crossed his face. They had to know, I'm not like Haven, Tyrion. I'm not going to bow and scrape to Tywin. Too much has happened for that. And as for Cersei, she's always been an odd one. She expects so much and deserves so little. She is queen, Uncle. The odd look returned, before being washed away with a smile and a nod down at the yards. Tyrion looks good, does he not? I've asked Sir Lodric Cassel to teach him the northern ways of fighting. He learns quickly, Tyrion replied, and it was true, the boy did. He's a credit to you, Uncle. What do you make of the others down there? He peered. The Stark brothers look as good as they always do. But Yorn Greyjoy seems to be learning. As for Cyrilla, she's no archer. Yet. Give the girl time, Uncle Geryon laughed. Then he sobered a little. Funny thing about Robb Stark, his eyes are older than his face. Think about that nephew. And with that enigmatic remark, he clattered down into the practice yards to watch his son more closely. Bronn, what he really wanted was to be back on that rock. His fishing rod in one hand, a bread roll with some ham in the other, a river-chilled bottle of ale within reach, and above all the sun on his face. Instead, he was going through a great big book listing the supplies of every sort that the foxhold had. Someone had once made a great number of hobnails, for example, enough that the foxhold was in no danger of running out of them any time soon, if ever. They also had a lot of pickled cucumbers. Well, in a siege there were worse things to eat. There were only so many ways you could roast a rat on a stick. Ursula Collish placed another book down next to the present one and then opened it to the page detailing the repairs that had last been done. She had stopped regarding him with open loathing and now merely eyed him in an uncertain fashion, as if he was a strange and bizarre creature, which, strictly speaking, he was. Normally Sells-words-turned landowners tended to misunderstand almost everything, try and sleep with the wrong kind of women, drink the wine cellar dry, and generally make a mess of a lot of things. In the first 6 months, he was not going to do that. Unfortunately, he had a nasty feeling that he had become a piece in whatever this was. It wasn't the normal Game of Thrones, not with this cob of business roiling everything. He still remembered it in his dreams. He mentally shook his head and looked at the new book. Oh look, more than a few local lords owed him money. A canny bird, the late Lord Collish. Someone knocked on the door and they both looked up. Master Haster, what can I do for you? Bronn asked. Lady Arryn is awake, my lord, and she is asking to speak with whoever is in charge. Rosier leant back in his chair and steepled his fingers. Is she now? Is she in her right mind, or is she still calling for the late very much unlamented Lord Baelish? Haster considered this carefully for a moment. I would say that she is in as stable a condition as can be expected from her at the moment. My lord, he rubbed his chin for a moment. Well, this was a surprise. He swapped a look with Ursula Collish, who raised an eyebrow at him and then nodded slightly. He nodded back. Right then, I'd better meet her. Steward Collish, please accompany me. She flickered an annoyed eyebrow at him, as if to say that, of course she was coming, but then stood and followed him. Lucy Arryn still looked terrible, but was less terrible looking than she had seemed just a few days ago. She was still pale and wan, but there was a little more color in her cheeks. She still looked as if she had lost a lot of weight very quickly. Other than her arm, of course, and her skin seemed to be a bit, well, loose in places. As they entered, she turned her head to look at them. Where is Lord Collish? She snapped the words peevishly. This is the foxhold, so where's Collish? Ah. Bronn hooked his thumbs into his belt and looked at his unwelcome guest. Lord Collish is dead. I'm the new lord of the foxhold, Bronn Castley. Lord Castley, his steward pointed out in tone of slight long-suffering. What she said? Bronn grinned with a tilt of his head. I'm Lord Castley. Lysa Arryn gaped uncertainly at him for a moment, and then shook her head. Very well, Lord Castley. I demand that you transport me at once to the Eyrie. I am the new Lady Regent of the Vale. Despite this, she waved at her stump, this indisposition, I need to get there as soon as possible. My son, my sweet Robin, he needs me. So I need a raven sent to Winterfell at once. My son must be returned to me at once, or the Vale will march on the north. Lysa Arryn's voice had quavered a lot as she had said those last words, and Bronn stared at the bloody woman. Oh, this one was madder than a sackload of concussed stoats. He looked at Haster, who looked confused, and then at Ursula, whose face had frozen into a mask of carefully hidden loathing for their guest. Lady Arryn, he said after a moment, you seem to be laboring under a few, well, delusions. Firstly, you are not the Lady Regent of the Vale. That's because your husband is not dead. Secondly, I'm not sending you to the Eyrie because Lord Arryn has told me to keep you here. And finally, no raven will fly to Winterfell, because you've got no power here. There was a pause as she stared at him, now white-faced again, and seemed to absorb what he had said. Jon Arryn lives. Ah, he does. He eyed her warily. She seemed to be breathing rather heavily. But that's impossible. He's dead. I saw him die. He's dead. Bronn swapped worried gazes with Ursula and then shook his head. He's very much alive and not very happy with you. The object of their worry froze into place, and then her eyes seemed to bulge and she thrashed into life on the bed. No, not that horrible old man. I killed him. I killed him. I stabbed him and I killed him and he's dead. And I am Lady Regent of the Vale. And you must do what I say. Do you hear me? Do what I say. Send word to my bitch of a sister that sweet Robin must return to me at once, or the knights of the Vale will ride, and the armies of the Riverlands. My father will support me. What are you all doing? Obey me. Sedate her, Bronn snapped. The milk of the poppy, Master Haster, as much as it will take to keep her quiet. I want her healthy enough to take to King's Landing and her trial. Haster nodded and then motioned two guards, who held the now weakly thrashing woman down as the maester poured something down her throat and then stroked it until she swallowed it. As Lady Arryn slumped down again, Bronn swapped a troubled look with Ursula. She's going to be trouble. I know it, he sighed. She's to be kept safe and healthy until we can get her out of here. Mad or not, and now let's get back to those books. There's trouble coming. I can smell it, and I want Foxhole to be ready for whatever comes. Ursula Collish stared at him for a long moment. Yes, my lord, she said in a voice that sent shivers up and down his spine. Ned, it had been such a long day, and yet it was not yet over. There was still the feast to come. Cat had organized everything to a nicety, and yet he still wished that it was all over. There was so much to do. But first he had one last meeting, and he looked up from his desk in the solar as Jory escorted Lords Royce and Redfort into the room before leaving and closing the door to stand guard outside. Horton Redfort looked older than the last time they'd met. But despite the now completely gray hair and beard that were shading to white in many places, he was still straight of back. He clasped arms with Ned, with a smile and a slap to his shoulder before making way for Bronze Jan. His old friend clasped arms with a grin. "Welcome back to Winterfell, yo," Ned smiled as they pounded each other's shoulders for a moment and then stepped apart. "Be welcome to both of you." The offer of bread, salt, and wine was hardly necessary, but it was important. As he lowered his cup, he looked at them both. Each was wearing adornments to their armor. Pieces of cloth were covering some parts. "You called us, Lord Stark, and we have come," Bronze Jan rumbled. The call shook Rhinstone down to its very foundations. "Aye, and the Redfort too," Horton broke in. "A greater shock than the start of the rebellion when I heard about the death of your father." "A lot has happened," Ned nodded, "and the others have indeed returned. You have seen the white parts that have gone about the land." "Yes," Bronze Jan said with a wince. "A strange and terrible sight, but at Roanstone we didn't need to see them to know what was coming. The runes, Ned," he pulled a piece of cloth to one side, and Ned could see that the rounded armor beneath was glowing dully. "The further north we get, the more they glow. And at Roanstone, well, I told you that there were certain places that we guard. The runes on the walls there glow even brighter than that. They're older than we thought. Carved after the last great war against the others, thousands of years ago, and there's more of them than I thought. They tell of the war, and the weapons that it was fought with. The first men came from all over to fight the others, and after the war they went home, but not before the wall was started. It must have been the last time that the first men were all united for one cause. Until now, for their descendants anyway," Horton muttered. "The king is here with the sword of the Durandons, and you have the fist of winter. There's word from the Reach that Otterbane has been found too." "Hey, we heard that too," Ned replied. "Tyrion Lannister found Rocktooth, the axe of his ancestors, at the Night Fort, along with twin daggers called the Warnings." Lords Royce and Redfort traded surprised glances. "That's good news indeed," muttered Bronze Jan. "There was a legend of a sword of light from Dorne and a shield that was once carried by the kings of the Riverlands." Ned frowned. "A sword of light? That might mean Dawn, the sword of House Dane. Lord Dane himself is here now. He bears it. As for the shield, well, I can send a raven to my good father. There might be some record in Riverrun." He leant back a bit and frowned. "That makes for a major First Men weapon for all the mainland Westerosi kingdoms except the Vale." "Then, what did the Vale have?" "This," Bronze Jan said quietly as he pointed at the glowing runes on his armor. "The runes? From what the runes on the walls at Runstone say, I think that the ones on our armor deter the others, in some way. How, I know not." He looked at his feet, his face working a little for a moment, before he looked up again. "Ned, I am ashamed to say that despite my own house's words of, 'We remember,' in this case, we do not. Certain runes glow and certain words don't, and I'm buggered if I know why. I've brought books with me, with each and every transcription in Runestone faithfully copied out, every rune on the walls, as well as sketches of them. I've had blacksmiths work on inscribing runes on new armor, but again, some glow and some don't. There must be a reason for this, something recorded somewhere. My only thought about this is that my ancestors thought that the secret was so obvious that they never wrote it down, and so the secret was lost. Ned? At the Red Fort, there's a dim legend that there were once rune scribers, those who knew how to craft runes of power. But who they were, how they did it, is a mystery." Horton Redfort looked more than a bit haunted as he said the words. Ned sighed. Yet another mystery. He forced a smile. "Well, better to know what to look for than not to know it at all. I'll look through everything you brought. Maester Luwin here is dedicated to me and has been looking through a great many records." The two Lords of the Vale nodded somberly. "By the way," Bronze Jan said in a more cheerful tone, "we saw Lord Aaron's son playing earlier with your own son, as well as King Robert's bastard. He looked much changed from the last time I saw him, and all for the better." "Ned," muttered Horton, "when we announced we were coming north, a number of lords asked that we observe Robert Aaron. There were rumors about him being weak and stunted. I am so very glad to see that they were not right. "Hey," Ned said with a certain amount of pride. "He's changed a lot. He's free of the poison that his mother was feeding him. Whether she knew it was poison or not, he reminds me of Dennis Aaron a great deal." "He's his father's heir, then?" "Aye. You mean, there have been rumors, Ned? Put them at rest. He's an Aaron. Looks just like Denise at that age. He's not Balish's son. The timings don't match up anyway. I have done some quiet questioning of my own. He is the son of John Aaron." The other two men looked at him, nodded seriously, and then Bronze Yohn smiled a little. "You have been to Castle Black?" "I have. And before you ask, yes, I saw Waymar there. He was well. He heard the call, as did all at the wall." A fist knocked at the door, and he looked at it. "Come." The door opened to reveal Jory Castle. "Your pardon, my lord, but Lady Stark has sent word that you need to bathe and change your clothes before tonight's feast." Ned rolled his eyes, but stood. "Your pardon, my lords, my wife calls me." He paused. "Send the records to Lewin if you would. We shall look into this." As he escorted Baratheon into the Great Hall of Winterfell. For the feast, he was already listing all the things that would take place that evening. Robert Baratheon was a creature of habit, and when it came to feasts, he always followed the same pattern. He would bellow some comments in a speech, he'd guzzle wine like water, he'd gorge on half a boar, eye the chest of the woman with the biggest tits in the room, say something drunken and rude, pinch the bottom of at least one serving girl, and generally be embarrassing. And 9 months later, a bastard would be born somewhere, unless moon tea was on hand that night. The feast did not start out the way that he predicted, however. As soon as the hall was full, Baratheon stood up. "I see many old friends here tonight. And new ones as well. I see men who marched with me to the Trident. I also see men who fought against me. And tonight I also see men who fought in Essos. We all share something, though. We are all men of Westeros. Aye, and women. And we all know what comes, what marches on the wall. My old friend here, Lord Stark, often told me that winter was coming. I never knew until the call was sent out how true that was. Yes, the North has sent out the call. We have answered it. Look around this hall. There are men and women here from all over Westeros. Stormlanders, Reachmen, Westerlanders, Crownlanders, Velamen, Riverlanders, even Iron Islanders. We have come here, at this time, in this place, to answer the call of the North. The others have returned. We all know what's at stake." The great hall was silent as everyone looked at Baratheon. James squinted around. They were hanging on his every word, although Cersei seemed to be suppressing a violent need to roll her eyes at all this foolishness. Sullenly, however, his back was straight, and his eyes were bright as he looked at Baratheon. "The North must know this. You are not alone," the king continued. "We will stand and fight with you. There is only one war ahead of us, the Great War, and it is here. Now, we will fight on the wall and beat back the others. From now until the end of time, I pledge this here and now. We will fight, and some will die, but we will win. Ours in the fury, because winter is coming." As he roared the last words, he raised his goblet high, and every person in the great hall stood almost as one and cheered him to the rafters. The hairs rose on the back of Jaime's neck. He hadn't been at the Trident before the Battle of the Ruby Ford, but he had always wondered what Baratheon had said to his men, there to make them fight with such fury. The feast started, and after a moment, Jaime broke out of his reverie and started to look about again. And the longer he watched, the more confused he became. Robert Baratheon was not guzzling wine as if it was water. Instead, he was sipping it. He wasn't sinking up to his jawline in roast boar. He was eating slowly. And he was not eyeing the serving wenches. He was instead involved in a very intent talk with Ned Stark and Stannis Baratheon, with the intermittent intervention from Maester Luwin, who would collect or deliver the occasional message. It was all most peculiar. And then it got odder. The feast was not a long one, and although many stayed on to drink wine and ale and generally carouse, Baratheon was not going to be one of them based on what he was saying. He cast an eye at Cersei. She was busy talking in a rather icy fashion with Catelyn Stark, who was trying her best to be civil, based on the look on her face. When his sister seemed to sense his gaze, she glanced in his direction and then blinked twice. "Ah, time to talk." As Cersei stood and then swept out in the general direction of the privies, he followed her, linking her arm in his as they went. "Interesting speech," he muttered. "They seemed to like it. They were drunk, they would, she all but sneered. Have you explored Winterfell much? I am a loyal member of the King's Guard. I have inspected much of it so that I can protect the king and his family. The first keep, for example, appears at first glance to be empty, but is actually being repaired in large part. Of course, that means that the broken tower, which was under repair, is now empty. I see, dear brother. What time does my husband leave tomorrow for this hunt of his? About mid-morning. Are you joining him? I have other matters to attend to at that hour. More inspections, for one. I am grateful for your diligence. Please let me know about what you find after he is gone on his hunt. Oh, I shall investigate matters most diligently and hard. I would expect no other, and with that she turned to face him with eyes that promised everything, before going off to the privy. He walked back to the great hall and arrived there just in time to see Robert Baratheon stalk out, still talking to Stark and the Tooth Grinder. As Stark walked past them, a great dark, shaggy figure stalked up to him, and Jaime repressed a shudder. That thing scared him a bit, he had to admit. There was something about the way that it looked at anyone who approached Stark, as if it was wondering how to pull their arms out of the sockets, and only then take a bite out of their throat. A flash of white at the corner of his eye made him aware of the arrival of Preston Greenfield, who paused and looked at the direwolf as well. Aye, his sworn brother muttered. She worries me as well. Not for the safety of the king. He's too close to Lord Stark. Those eyes, though. Jeffrey took the first watch that night, having asked for it. He was still getting used to Winterfell, and much to his interest, the castle was far warmer than he had first thought. Tyrion had told him once that the place had been built on top of hot springs and that the water was somehow pumped about inside the walls. All he knew was that his room had access to hot water at all times, and he was going to enjoy a bath the next day. Oh, and another surprise. No chambermaids or other female servants were in the king's chambers. Instead, the only sounds to emerge were loud snores from a very asleep Robert Baratheon. It was no wonder, really. The man had been staggering around the courtyard earlier with another log on his shoulders. Well, not quite staggering. Striding, and then he'd had a sparring session with Ned Stark that had left the pair of them covered in sweat, leaning on their practice swords and grinning as they swapped old war stories. When Preston Greenfield relieved him in the early hours, Jaime did not go to bed at once. No, first he strode about the courtyard outside, sniffing their air, measuring and assessing. Only when he thought that the last of the servants had gone to bed did he make a move. He took off his white cloak, balled it up, and then walked to a door to one side of the armory where he had left a sheet that he had, borrowed from a neat pile in the servants' quarters. His path had then taken him to the bigger courtyard, to one side that led to... He slowed and stopped. He had the oddest feeling that he was being watched. But by who? He peered around carefully. Every now and then he saw a spear flash in the moonlight as a guard walked on the walls, but they were all far away. It wasn't until he looked towards the guard's hall that he realized just who, or rather what, was watching him. The direwolf pup, of all things. It was just sitting there, its head tilted to one side as it regarded him gravely. Well, perhaps pup was the wrong word. The damn thing was as big as a hound already, if a lot fluffier. Its ears swiveled slightly as he approached. He eyed it carefully. Shoo. It just sat there, staring at him. Impudent little thing, aren't you? He muttered. And then blinked a little as the little direwolf seemed to laugh with a huff of sound. Bugger off. He walked past it, having suppressed the desire to kick the bloody thing, a bad idea given its mother, walked around the guard's hall, and then strode quickly to the broken tower. The door at the base of it was open, and he pattered up the creaking stairs, past the first floor, which was filled with building supplies, and onto the second floor, where someone had left a desk with plans neatly stacked to one side. It belonged to a Northman called Gethin, or something like that, who was spending the next day in the first keep repairing as much as possible. Jaime dropped the sheet there, and then peered out of the window. Perfect. Isolated, with a creaking staircase that would give plenty of warning. The next level up was inaccessible, being blocked off by a wooden door. The plans said unsafe. His next task was to get some water, and fortunately the well had a well-oiled windlass. The secret to assignments such as the one that would happen the next day was to not smell like sex afterwards. So, a sheet, a pail of water, and some soap, all ready. It was all so very primitive, but so was the North. As he left the tower carefully, looking about, he caught sight of that bloody direwolf pup. It was still staring at him as he strode towards his quarters. It pricked up its ears and then loped off. How odd. Well, nothing to worry about. He had a bath ahead of him, and then sleep. And then, after that, something that made him feel more alive than anything else. Jon Stark. He yawned as he walked down the corridor. Father had told them all to take it easy the night before, adding that they'd have to be up early. Well, this was early. Too bloody early. The sun had risen, but it was earlier than he was used to, and they had to get ready for this bloody hunt. He knew what was at stake. Father had explained everything in great detail, so they all knew just how important this was. The plan had to work. From what he'd seen of the little shit Joffrey Baratheon would make a bloody awful king, and Robb's tale of what the boy had done when he was king had been a terrible one. A lot still had to be done, though. Robb and Lewin were talking to one side with Stannis Baratheon and Jory Cassill. He sighed a little and then looked at the sun. Another few hours. He spent the first of those hours checking out the horses and making sure that the saddles and other riding gear was in good shape. The grooms helped with that, but it kept him busy, and Theon even wandered in at one point to help. It was odd how much Theon had changed. He'd gone from being an arrogant, prideful idiot into a far more thoughtful person. Oh, there were still flashes of that old Theon now and then. But whenever he said anything meaningful, it was only after a considerable amount of thought. Plus, he despised his own father, which gave him something in common with Jon. After the stables, he walked out into the training yards. Robb had the same thought and was practicing with ice against a target dummy. He was much better at using the huge blade, but he still needed to practice with it, and Sira Roderick was there besides him, giving him instructions and advice, whilst on a balcony to one side, Sansa watched with the Princess Marcella. The little princess seemed to have very wide eyes. And then there was the second group, the smaller one. Reed and Val were standing next to Sorella Sand, with the red-headed wildling giving the Dornish girl advice about the best way to aim and loose arrows smoothly. After a while, the wildlings moved away and left the Dornish girl to her practice. Val went to watch Robb just what was going on there, whilst Yak Prit sought him out. Where's Dorne? What? Where's Dorne? She keeps talking about the place and how cold the north is compared to Dorne. Given how warm it is down here compared to north of the wall, Dorne must be hellish. How far south is it? All the way south, the southernmost part of all Westeros. And yes, it's hot down there. Whatever she and Lord Dane say about Dorne, well, you might not believe them, but it's very likely true. She nodded slowly, before looking about the walls of Winterfell again. I never thought I'd see anything like this. It's the biggest place in the world. I've read that there are bigger places. King's Landing is huge. In terms of Citadel, Storm's End is big too. Rudy Lawton mouthed the names almost in wonder, before shaking her head a little. So this is where you live. Jon Stark, will you live here all your life? He paused at that. No, he said eventually. Lord Stark says that he'll grant me a holdfast somewhere. I'll be a bannerman to my brother Robb, found a cadet branch. Snow Starks, perhaps. It all seemed so unreal, a plan for a future that he had no idea if he would ever reach. He had to survive the war first, and that was easier said than done. Does he have a South Royal lady lined up for you then? All dressed up in la-di-da dresses. He stared at her, baffled. La-di-da? Silks and satins, she replied, mouthing the words oddly, as if she had no idea what they were. All thin and flimsy, and no use north of the wall. This conversation was taking a very odd direction, but he shook his head. No. My father has no wife lined up for me. Good, said Yackley. I like a challenge. And then she stalked off. She baffled him at times, she really did. A throat was cleared to one side, and he turned to see father standing there. He looked amused for some reason, although the smile faded after a moment. It's time. The main courtyard was abuzz with activity as they walked into it. The horses had all been saddled, but Jon still checked his out of habit. Looked fine. Robb was doing the same to one side, and they shared a look and a nod, along with Theon on the other side. A booming laugh heralded the arrival of the king, who looked as if he had just stuck his head in a bucket of water, which was probably what had just happened. The man had been walking about with that log on his shoulders again, something that still awed him a bit. He'd grown up on stories about Robert Baratheon, and the man was certainly every bit as impressive as those stories had made him out to be. As the king heaved himself onto his saddle, with Ser Barristan Selmy next to him, he looked for father, before finally spotting him. "Right, Ned," he shouted as he took the proffered spear. "Let's get some boar for the supper table." The huntsman roared agreement, and then the first of them started to ride through the gates, a small thicket of spears, as he urged his own horse out. Jon looked quickly around the courtyard. Lady Stark was on the balcony, with Arya and Bran next to her. In the future that Robb had come from, Bran had fallen off the walls on this day. That was not going to happen today. He could see Joffrey and the Hound ahead of him, both looking unamused. The little shit probably thought that he had better things to do than participate in this hunt, whilst the Hound was probably still hungover and surly after all the ale he had swilled the previous night. And to one side he caught a flash of blonde hair, the Queen. As he passed through the gates, he knew that if all went well, he would return to a castle that would be, well, it wouldn't be boring. Ned, there was a man on the gatehouse with a Myrish spyglass watching them. He knew that because he had issued orders for that to happen. The moment that the hunting party entered the Wolf's Wood, then a rider on a very fast horse would be sent after them. It was all a matter of timing. The trees were looming ahead, and he sighed a little. Explaining all this was going to be difficult. He and Stannis would have to talk Robert down from killing the Lannister twins the moment that he saw them. Robert was giving orders already about the hunt, where some of the best horsemen would go, how much of an interval there would be, all the things that went to making a hunt successful. Ned watched all this, issuing orders of his own here and there. Robb, Jon, and Theon were to one side, talking quietly amongst themselves. He wanted to look over his shoulder at the tray line behind them as he felt the minutes trickling through his fingers, but he dared not. He detested all this trickery and mummery, but he had no choice in this. The two had to be caught in the act, and this was the best chance for this. Thanks to Arya and Nymeria, he knew that the Kingslayer had already made preparations in the Broken Tower. It came as a relief when the rider arrived, on a blowing horse. "Lord Stark, a message from the Lord Hand," the rider panted as he held out the note. He took it and unfolded it. Yes, a summons from Stannis, as they had planned it. "Your Grace," Ned shouted to Robert. "What's wrong, Ned?" Robert looked at the message. "What's happened?" "Lord Stannis and my wife need me back at Winterfell. A minor dispute, but they need me back there. I'll be back, but I need to take Robb with me. And I need to borrow Sir Barristan." Robert stared at him confused. "Sell me? Why?" "He's highly regarded and impartial. Stannis asked for him to witness the resolution of this." He smiled. "I'll be back. Don't hog all the best boars to yourself, or the deer." Robert groaned at the pun, but nodded. "All right. Sir Barristan." "Your Grace?" "You heard?" "I did, Your Grace. I'd be happy to help, but I do it under protest. My place is here by your side." "I've got the others," Robert replied. "Greenfield too. Jon and Theon have hunted here often. They'll help you," Ned said as he turned his horse. "Let's get this done with." The trio galloped back to Winterfell, but halfway there, Ned held up a hand, and they slowed. "Sir Barristan, my apologies, but I have taken you away under something of a false pretense. We are needed at Winterfell, but for a different reason, a far more important one. Treason." The old knight's frown turned into an alarmed stare. "Treason, my lord. Is the king in any danger?" "None whatsoever. He is safe at the hunt. You have my word on it. But there is a situation in Winterfell, one that involves treason. I need you as a witness to this." Selmy's eyes flickered over his face before he nodded slowly. "Very well, my lord. As I have your word that the king is safe, I will assist you in this." They rode in silence after this, but not to the Hunter's Gate. Instead, they went to a small postern gate that was at the side of one of the towers on the wall. Faithful Jory was there, with his uncle next to him. As they passed through the wall and into the Godswood, he saw that Stannis Baratheon was approaching, with two of his own men. "Lord Stark, Sir Barristan, we are already here. Your daughter says that they are both in the tower." "Who are we talking about?" "Lord Stark mentioned treason, my Lord Hand." Selmy was frowning again. "Oh, it is treason indeed. I will not say more. We need you to witness this in an impartial manner. But we need to move now." Selmy still looked troubled, but nodded, and then they were off through the trees. "Your orders have been carried out, my lord," Sir Roderick muttered. "No one is to go near the tower. There will be no warning of our arrival." "Good," Ned muttered, and then silence fell as they walked. The men were armed with a collection of weapons, including short swords, daggers, and 2 crossbows. And above all, they were not wearing anything that might clink or make a noise easily. He eyed Sir Barristan. The man was in his usual plate steel armor, but he also walked like a cat. Nymeria was sitting at the base of the tower and looked at them as they approached, before huffing and then loping away. Arya didn't know why she had been asked to keep an eye on the Kingslayer, but had jumped at the chance to warg. Ned turned to the others and held a finger to his lips before walking to the scaffolding and then pulling the cloth carefully to one side. A ladder led to a carefully constructed wooden walkway that curved upwards. Ned led them all upwards, treading carefully. The walkway had been built well, and his inspection of it before Robert had arrived had shown that it was possible to use it quietly. That said, he moved as silently as he could. Up they went, his heart pounding at the slightest noise made by anyone, up to the opening in the side of the tower. They passed through it and onto the stairs. The stairs leading up from the ground floor were not in good repair. These stairs, however, they had been completely repaired. Still, they went down just as carefully to the wooden door that blocked the way. Jari slipped past him and put an eye to the slight gap in it. Then he nodded. "They've closed the door," he said in a ghost of a whisper. Ned nodded and then opened the door, which had been very well oiled indeed. As they assembled on the landing, the crossbows, which had been cocked beforehand, were loaded with quarrels. The others placed a hand on the pommel of their swords and looked at Ned, who had an ear to the door. Inside he could hear moans and groans of passion. They were in luck, and then he leant back slightly and kicked the door open. "Goziermi." Their first coupling in the tower had been one born of need and lust. After so long a time on the road, being unable to touch each other as they might have longed for had been torture. So the moment that he had closed the door to the room, she had been on him like a falcon on a sparrow. Sparrow he was. They had fucked urgently, almost roughly, and he had been unable to make it last as long as he might have wanted it to. Afterwards they had lain in each other's arms, and all the pent-up torrent of bitterness had poured out of Cersei. She hated this place. She hated the North. Robert had no right to bring her and the children here. The Northerners were all savages. Stannis was an idiot and shouldn't be Hand of the King. Jaime should be instead. Oh, and she had written to Father and Brightroar would be taken from Uncle Jarian by force if need be, and given to Jaime. Or Joffrey. She hadn't made her mind up yet. And the closeness, the smell of her, the touches, the kisses, all had led to this, their second coupling. This was longer. He was able to take his time on this, making her groan and shudder as he thrust into her. Nothing louder. They could not be detected, but the look on her face was amazing, showing him everything that she felt about him. There was no warning. 1 minute it was just them, lost in that moment, and then the door burst open, almost coming off its hinges, and a group of men darted in, drawing swords as they came. He froze in utter horror, shocked beyond belief. The stairs had not creaked. There had been nothing to warn of their approach. They had been discovered in the most compromising of positions. And then as he saw Stannis Baratheon and Ned Stark enter the room, with someone else behind him, the moment of shock broke. Cersei shrieked in shock and jerked away from him, back as fast as she could, whilst trying to use first her hands, and then whatever she could grab of the sheets to cover her nakedness. Jaime gaped at her for a moment, as his rapid deflating cock came close to being hit by her feet, and then his instincts kicked in. Sword, he thought automatically. I need my sword. He rolled to one side, towards where he had thrown his clothes and left his sword. Reached out with one hand, and then a boot hammered into his shoulder, and he was driven to one side with a shock that made his teeth click. Sword, he needed to get to his sword. He pushed himself up and tried to lunge for it again, aware that Cersei had stopped screaming incoherently and was now screaming orders that they all get out. Now, but suddenly a hand grabbed his sword and pulled it away, and there was a crossbow being pointed at him. "Don't!" Jari Castle said, the word with an intentness that promised that he would pull the trigger if he had to. He was fast. He'd always been fast. But could he outspeed a crossbow bolt? His sword was out of reach, but his boots had his dagger in them, and they were just over there. And if he could just get to it. A hand descended on the back of his neck, and all of a sudden he was hurtling backwards to hit the wall. The impact made him see stars for a moment, and then a gauntleted hand was wrapped around his neck and started to squeeze. It was Samly, and there was a look on his face that he had never seen before. The Lord Commander of the Kingsguard's eyes were blazing with incandescent fury, whilst his face wore a snarl of utter rage. I'll burn your cloak myself, lighting it with your page from the White Book. You are not worthy of them. You never were. You have no honor. You are no knight of the Kingsguard. You are no knight at all. He may have been an old man, but his fingers were not. No, they were made of iron and they kept squeezing no matter how hard he beat at them with his bare hands, and his vision was starting to go gray at the edges. Selmy! Hold! Ned Stark was at Selmy's side now. They will both face the king's justice. But you have to let him go. Slowly, so very slowly, Siap's fingers released their grip on his throat, and Jaime took a desperate gulp of air into his lungs. Ciro Barristan Siap still loomed over him, a look of utter fury on his face. He keeps a knife, a dagger in his boot. Be wary of this one, he's an animal. Joey Castle strode over to his boots and pulled the dagger out, his eyebrows going up and down. Nasty, he muttered. You can put an eye out with something like this. Cersei was still screaming something about having everyone executed, when Stannis Baratheon stepped in front of her. Be silent. His roar actually shut her up. You are both under arrest. The charge is treason to the crown. Throw some clothes on them both. We'll need to hood them as well. Take him to a cell and confine her to her room. Search it for blades first. You cannot do this, Cersei screamed. I am the queen. Not for much longer, Stark snapped. Not for much longer at all. Ned, they had been lucky. So very, very lucky. He had gambled and won, a calculated gamble, one that he had thought long and hard about, but still a gamble. If they had been too early or too late, then they might not have been able to discover the truth of it, but now they knew, and so did Selmy. The old knight was in a killing rage, but was restraining himself. With every moment as they went down the creaking stairs with their now hooded prisoners, he seemed to rebuild the image of the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard that he usually showed. Where will you hold them, my lord? Selmy asked formally, an echo of the rage still in his voice. I suggest you choose a very safe place. We have made sure that there are 2 rooms prepared, one a cell and the other a secure room. This will cause a lot of trouble, to say the very least. The hooded figure of Jaime Lannister seemed to find this funny, and Selmy glanced at him, narrowed his eyes, and clamped a gauntleted hand around the back of his neck and squeezed hard enough to cause a yelp of pain. Silence, dog. That's something of an understatement. Sir Barristan, Ned sighed. Jerry, take the prisoners on to the Old Keep, via the side gate. We have guards there, men I trust. As the stumbling, in the case of Cersei muttering he had threatened to gag her at one point, prisoners were taken away. He turned to Sir Barristan and Stannis. We need to take care of the Red Cloaks in Winterfell. Their numbers are small, but they might try something. They will not, said a new voice, and he turned with an oath, his hand going to the fist at his waist, whilst the other 2 drew their swords. Tyrion Lannister and his son were standing in the shadows to one side. Neither was armed. Peace. We are unarmed. What do you want, Lannister? Stannis ground out. Then he frowned. How did you come to be here? Tyrion Lannister looked at his son, who nodded at him before clearing his throat nervously. I dreamt a green dream, my lords. 2 nights ago, and again last night. I dreamt that 2 lions rutted at the top of a tower, which crumbled beneath them and plunged them into a pit of despair. The young man blushed a bit. One of the lions tried to claw its way back into the light, but which one it was, and if it succeeded, I do not know. I dreamt something similar last night as well, Tyrion Lannister muttered. You look a little skeptical, Sir Barristan. You should not. Green dreams are enigmatic. Nebulous things of mist, with many interpretations. But this one was clear. I dreamt of twin lions, and this tower. There could be only one conclusion. He drew himself up. I will order the Lannister guards in Winterfell and Wintertown to stay in their barracks. I am the brother of Tywin Lannister. I will make them listen. You have my word on that. Not the word of my idiot nephew, Jaime, I might add. There was a long pause as they looked at the 2 Lannisters, the other Lannisters, as it were. And then Ned nodded slightly. Very well. As Selmy and Stannis stared at him, he raised an eyebrow. They have both proved themselves, and their word is good at least. Selmy raised an eyebrow at this, and there was the faintest sound of teeth grinding from Stannis, but eventually they both nodded. Not that they had much of a choice, not here in Winterfell. He looked at Tyrion Lannister and jerked his head towards the barracks. Very well, go. I need to tell the king what has happened here, Selmy muttered. He will be, well, beyond furious. A moment, Sir Barristan. 2 other things. Firstly, and I ask your pardon for this, but it is important. We have just placed the queen in confinement. Which of your sworn brothers can now be relied on? Which of them were placed in the Kingsguard under her orders? Zemley bristled for a moment, and then his shoulders slumped a little. It is true that the Kingsguard is not what it was. When I served Aerys in the beginning, well, 'tis no matter. He took a deep breath. Blunt. He's brave, but not a thinker. He's from the Crown Lands, and should do whatever his king commands, no matter who the king is. Trant, too. Sadly, I suspect that the queen has corrupted them both. Moore is an odd man, but I think that we can rely on him. Greenfield, too. As for Oakhart, well, he is as sound as his name or thinks and hopes that he is. Of them, Greenfield and Oakhart are with us here in Winterfell. The queen objected, but with all that has happened, I wanted men that I could trust. Implicitly, or as much as I could trust them. Ned looked at him for a long moment and then nodded. It might be, he said delicately, that you might need to reconsider how to deal with certain of your sworn brothers. Jaime Lannister must be dismissed from the Kingsguard. But more of that for another time. There is the second matter, that of Prince Joffrey. What color are his hair and eyes, Sir Barristan? The old knight looked confused for a moment. He has his mother's coloring, Lord Stark. Gold of hair and green of eye. And his brother? And his sister? The same. And what color hair and eyes does Gendry Storm have? Why? The boy takes after his grace, as does Edric Storm. And I believe that another of his grace's bastard children are here as well. Maya Stone, all three are black of hair and blue of eye, just like their father. Selmy just stared blankly at him for a long moment, and then all of a sudden the rage returned. You mean to say that? Gods, it cannot be. Oh, believe me, it is, Stannis ground out. I have seen 5 more of Robert's bastards in King's Landing and other places with word of another 2. All were black of hair and blue of eye. My brother's blood is strong. How much of it therefore flows in the veins of Joffrey, Tommen, and Myrcella? Selmy looked as if he was about to burst into 1,000 pieces with rage, and then he paused and seemed to master his anger. I should have insisted on that whoreson being dismissed from the Kingsguard when it was reformed after the war. But what is done now cannot be undone. Very well, the king's children might not be his own. They too will have to be guarded. He peered at Ned. They are but children, though, he all but pleaded. They cannot be executed, no matter how great the rage of the king. You have my word on that, Sir Barristan, Ned grated. I will not see children die for the mistakes of their parents. I agree, Stannis said heavily. But they must remain here, under protection. Ned nodded and then looked at them both. I will ride out with you, Sir Barristan, and tell the king. He'll want to get back here at once, and hopefully the gallop will allow him to see through his rage. And at the position this has placed him in, my Lord Hand, I leave matters in Winterfell in your hands. We will be back soon. The 3 men nodded at each other, and then Ned and Selmy strode off to the gate where their horses were being held for them. As they rode back towards the Wolf's Wood at a steady canter, Ned thought matters over carefully. What of Clegane? The Hound? Sir Barristan Selmy fell silent for a long moment, as if in deep thought. He will obey the orders of the king. He is true to that. The king is the only person who can give him his heart's desire. And what is that? A chance to fight and kill the Mountain. Ned shivered a little as he remembered that room in the Red Keep and the pathetic little, and not so little bodies. He's welcome to that animal. They found Robert standing in a clearing, with a huge smile on his face, and the carcasses of 4 boars already slung from poles, held by servants. Robb and Jon were with him, looking alert and gesturing in the direction of where they thought more boars might be. As soon as his old friend saw them, he beamed at them. That Saparistan, back at last. But then he saw the looks on their faces, and he sobered and strode over to them both. I know that look, Ned. What's amiss? Ned dismounted and rubbed his chin before jerking his head to one side. I need to talk to you, Robert. The king frowned, but followed him over to one side. What is it, Ned? We need you back in Winterfell. We have uncovered a treasonous plot against you. Robert frowned direfully. Treason? What treason? Ned looked about carefully. Robb and Jon were close, looking about the place, whilst Selmy was whispering into the ear of Preston Greenfield, whose eyes had suddenly widened hugely. Prince Joffrey was off on the far side of the clearing, looking sour and sulky. Your wife has been discovered, having relations with another man. Robert just stared at him for a long moment. Having relations? What? Then the words fully sank in, and his face flushed with blood. What? With who? Calmly, Robert. Calmly. There's a lot at stake here. I will tell you we ride, as we need to leave now, and ride for Winterfell. Robert glared at him, his face red with rage, but eventually he nodded choppily and mounted his horse. Ned looked at Robb, who nodded and then gestured at the head huntsman, who in turn led a large section of the party away, north after more boar. That just left Ned in charge of a smaller, now grim-faced group who coalesced around them, all in Stark or Baratheon colors. "Who, Ned? Tell me," Robert snarled as he urged his horse back towards Winterfell. He hesitated for a moment, but then said the words he had been dreading, saying, "Her own brother, the Kingslayer." Ned winced as he said those words, expecting a bellow of rage, but instead, Robert's snarl deepened and he urged his horse on faster. "I'll kill that bitch myself." Robert finally roared as they reached a track and caught sight of the walls of Winterfell in the distance. Well now, time for him to preach restraint. It was not going to be easy, at all. Tyrion. He closed the book and patted it gently. The number and variety of books that he had now read about the First Men and their wars was growing by the day. But the more he read, the more frustrated he became. The last war against the others had been so long ago that all they had were legends, an echo of a rumor of a conflated, half-remembered semi-fact. If it wasn't for the fact that the situation north of the Wall was so serious, he would have been in a paradise of books. Instead, he felt as if he was scrabbling in the darkness, trying to feel his way towards answers, only able to use his fingertips. For a man used to finding answers easily, this was beyond frustrating. Somewhere, in all these books, there had to be something, anything, that gave a hint about that damn chair in the Night Fort. It was important. He knew it. But why? He pulled out another book, but just before he could open it, he heard hurried footsteps to one side, which heralded the arrival of Elrien, who looked worried. "Cousin Tyrion, my father wants to see you at once. It's urgent." He looked at the lad. He was rattled. More rattled than he had been at the Battle of the Night Fort. "What has happened?" Alamarian looked about. "Something of great import. Father needs to talk to you now, cousin." It was easy to find Uncle Garyon. He was standing at a doorway in the barracks, talking to the leader of the Red Cloaks who had accompanied the king. Or rather, he was shouting at him. "I am Ser Garyon Lannister, Lord of Lanniseal in the Summer Islands and brother of Lord Tywin Lannister. I am the oldest and most senior male Lannister in Winterfell, and you will acknowledge my authority." He looked over to Alaryon, who hurried over, and it was only then that Tyrion realized that he was holding Brightroar, which he handed over to his father. Geryon nodded at his son and then held up the sword, hilt first. "Do you see this? Brightroar's the sword of the Lannister kings of the Westerlands. Think of it as the symbol of my authority. If you cross me, you'll be lucky to get a job as a sellsword guarding a hovel somewhere in Essos. And if you are unlucky, then you'll be very dead." "But Ser Geryon," the Red Cloak started to say, only to be cut off by his uncle. "This matter is the business of the king. He has the ultimate authority here, and if need be, I will involve him. Do you want that?" The Red Cloak went white and shook his head. "But the queen is the business of the king. Now, have your men stand down. You will not do a damn thing without my direct orders. Do you understand?" The Red Cloak nodded. "Good. Now, I will arrange to have food and drink brought to your men. Keep a firm grip on them. I will be watching to make sure that you do so." The Red Cloak scurried off, a combination of fear and sullen resentment on his face, and Geryon beckoned Tyrion over. "Nephew, I need your help." "What has Cersei done, uncle?" Tyrion asked the question as a worm of terror gripped his innards. "Gods, what had his fool of a sister attempted?" Geryon looked at him and then sighed and winced at the same time. "She," he muttered quietly, "was discovered having relations with your brother." The meaning of the word relations clattered about in his head for a long instant. What had he meant? Before all of a sudden everything came together in his head with terrifying speed. They were coupling. It sounds more like they were rutting like mindless animals, but yes, they were found together, naked and entwined. He felt as if he had been suddenly plunged into a vat of ice-cold water that he had never suspected had been lurking under his feet. The implications were terrifying. Who witnessed this? Uncle Geryon somehow managed to look even grimmer. "Ned Stark, Stannis Baratheon, Barristan Selmy, and some guards. The ravens are flying already." It was not a vat, it was a small lake of cold water. Gods, what do you need me to do? Keep calm and do nothing rash at all. You are not your brother, you are more of a thinker. You have already probably considered what this will mean, not just for your siblings, but for all of us who bear the name Lannister. Yes, he had indeed thought through the implications, and frankly, he was now terrified. I always knew that she was selfish and stupid, he said, slightly dazed. But I never thought that she could be this selfish and stupid. Their lives are now possibly forfeit. If Jaime is very, very lucky, it might be the wall. Gods, his voice trailed off as the full implications hit him. Father is going to be beyond furious. What did that captain of the Red Cloaks know? Just that the Queen has been arrested on a charge of treason. We need to keep an eye on the men, to make sure that no one does something stupid. Wars have been started over such things. 7 hells, wars have been started for less. Our eyes need to be on the wall, not on Tywin's reaction. Tyrion nodded numbly, and then looked at Jerian. Uncle, did you suspect something? You seem to be awfully calm about this. Lorien had a green dream that hinted at this, so did I. He absorbed this. Did you warn anyone? Sorrow crossed Jerian's face. Would Surgery have listened? Would your brother? She wrote me a letter last night, ordering me to give up Bright Roar. I wanted to tear it up. I did not know that this was going to happen, but I knew that disaster was hanging over her head somewhere. She had to bring Janeway into this. She always thinks that only she knows best. He closed his eyes for a long moment, and now she has doomed them both. A horn was sounded somewhere, to one side, and he heard shouts. And the king has returned from his hunting, Jerian sighed. Keep your guard up. House Lannister is now on the brink of a precipice. Tyrion stared at him, and then his eyes widened. Oh, the children? Aye. 3 bastards of the king in Winterfell, under our noses, black of hair and blue of eye. Curious, is it not, compared to Joffrey and the others? No, it wasn't a lake of cold water, it was a sea. And they might all drown in it if they were not all very, very careful now. Ned. A lifetime ago, Jon Arryn had once given him a piece of very good advice. Give Robert bad news at the start of a journey, not at the end. He'll ride out a lot of his fury and merely be bloody furious at the end. As they galloped for Winterfell, he could see that it was working. Sort of. The snarl of fury had eroded slightly into a mere thunderous scowl of anger. Robert was thinking hard, not just raging, thinking. He wasn't sure if that was reassuring or terrifying. Robert had changed. He wasn't the Robert of the Vale anymore, or the Robert of the Siege of Pike, and certainly not the Robert that Robb had remembered from that dark future he had seen. No, this Robert was more focused than ever before. The closest he had been to this had been on the morning of the Battle of the Trident, when he knew that Rhaegar Targaryen did indeed command the enemy army. The stakes kept inching that bit higher, every time he thought about what was about to happen. Robert's first reaction was going to be on the lines of killing his faithless wife at once, followed by his equally untrustworthy good brother. A horn sounded from the gatehouse they were headed towards, and as the gates opened he could see Stannis Baratheon standing there, one hand on the pommel of his sword, and the other clutching pieces of paper. To his right was Luwin, and to his left was Jory Castle. As they drew rein, Robert all but threw himself out of the saddle, tossed the reins to a groom, and scowled at his brother. Well? Where are they? Stannis held up a hand. In the first keep. She's in quarters and he's in a cell. They are well separated, Robert. Robert was visibly going red in the face, but at the same time trying to control himself, judging by the way that he was clenching and unclenching his fists. He took a half step forwards, but then he closed his eyes for a long moment. No, he snarled. If I see either of them now, I'll just kill them without even thinking about it. His knuckles were white and his nostrils were flared, and Ned looked at him worriedly. "Be solar now, your grace," he said firmly. "There is much that we must discuss." Robert stood there for a long moment, irresolution on his face, as he looked at the main keep and then at the first keep, emotions, anger, fury, disgust, worry, roiling his face. Ned watched for a moment before intervening. "Robert," he said in a low, urgent voice, "we must talk, now." Robert looked at him, his nostrils flaring yet again, and then he nodded choppily as he stamped off in the direction of the main keep. Ned let out a heartfelt sigh before swapping raised eyebrows with the others near him. The moment that he reached his solar, Ned poured wine for all, and then bade Ser Barristan close the door and stay in the room. Robert took his cup of wine with a look of distracted anger and gulped from it. Finally, he stopped staring at the far wall and seemed to come back from wherever he had gone to. Who saw them? Ned traded glances with Stannis and then leaned forwards. Me, Stannis, Ser Barristan, Roderick, and Jory Castle, and 2 guards. And they were fucking. Yes, Ned said heavily. How long has this been going on for? We don't know, Ned sighed. Which is the problem? Robert's brow furrowed in another huge scowl. Why is that a problem? Robert, Stannis broke in. What color hair do your true-born children have? And what color eyes? Gold hair, Robert said, still frowning. And green eyes. And what color hair and eyes do Gendry, Edric, and Maya have? Black hair and blue eyes. Then he sat bolt upright. Stannis, what are you saying? All Baratheon men have second toes. That's a shade longer than our big toes. The women, too. I noticed it on Shireen when she was a child. I have it. You have it. Does Joffrey? I don't know. I have seen 8 of your bastards. All have black hair and blue eyes. I even checked the feet of the babes. All had a second toes, slightly longer than their big toes. They are you children. They show Baratheon traits. Joffrey, Tommen, and Myrcella have none. Not a single Baratheon trait. He set his jaw grimly. I do not know if they are yours. We have to act on the assumption that they are not. Robert's face was busy going red again, and Ned moved to quickly take the goblet out of his hand before his rapidly tightening fist crushed it. What? That fucking whore. I'll kill her. I'll take Stormbreaker and I'll cut her fucking head off before I start slicing her traitorous brother into pieces. Robert, Ned bellowed, so loudly that Robert blinked and fell silent. You can't. Not yet. We need them to confess. We have to know if the children are yours or not. We need Cersei to admit her guilt, or Jaime if she will not say. These are not small folk accused of a crime. These are the children of Tywin Lannister accused of treason to the throne. The greatest crime in the realm. They have sought to alter the succession. They are traitors. But we must tread carefully here. We must get to the truth. Robert had turned an alarming succession of colors during this, and now sat there, visibly thinking things through as his nostrils flared so hard that white lines appeared by them. Gods, he choked in a voice that trembled with rage. I want to kill them both, cut them to pieces. But you're both right. I can't. Not yet. We need them to confess about my children. He passed a trembling hand over his eyes. Joffrey, I've always wondered about him. There's little enough of me in him. But Tommen, he's a sweet child. Reminds me of Renly when he was a boy. And Myrcella, she's a good girl. Cleverer than I thought, but she hides it. Hides it from her bitch of a mother. He paused. How can we tell? Oddly enough, it was Ser Barristan who cleared his throat and stepped forwards. Your pardon, Your Grace, but I think I can suggest a way. Honorats. He did so like to people watch at times. It could be amusing to watch people react in so many different ways to the same thing. However, this time, it was different. He was standing in the shadow of one of the pillars in the throne room and watching as people approached the table in front of the Iron Throne. On it was the cage with the head of the White, the moving, hissing, snapping, severed head, the thing that had no right to exist. The thing that had been the final blow to all his plans. Oh, the plans had been ruined long before that, thanks to the call, but he had always hoped that perhaps with a little time things could be rearranged. The timings shifted a few years along, the puppets nudged a bit further. The dance continued for a few more steps. Not anymore. Not now. Not now that more and more people were aware of what was coming. A Stormlord, House Buckler was it, strode in with a small retinue, and Varys pulled a little deeper into the shadows as he placed his hands up his sleeves and watched the group as they strode, swaggered almost up to the table. From what he could hear of their words, they were already convinced that it was all just a trick, a myrish toy of some kind. But the closer they got to the gnashing jaws and the blues eyes that glared at them, the weaker the japes became, and then they ceased completely. The man of the Night's Watch, who had been watching as well, stepped up and spoke to them quietly, allowing them to pick the cage up and look into it with white faces and hands that had started to tremble. As the cage went back down onto the table and the Stormlanders walked out in a subdued silence, Varys sighed a little. The word was going out. The others had indeed returned. Legends walked north of the wall, and magic was not merely real, but undisputable. He padded noiselessly off to his office where he sat down, poured from a sealed bottle, and then sipped quietly, while staring at the map on the wall. Everything was different, changed, altered. The king was in the north, being an actual king instead of a lecherous and drunken glutton. You wouldn't be surprised if the king's great matter, so cliched of Aaron and Stannis Baratheon to call it that. Did they really think that everyone around them were clueless idiots? Well, not everyone. Just most of them. Also was resolved there. It really was the perfect place. Cersei and her fool of a brother were certainly both stupid and arrogant enough to think that they could never be caught. It would be such a tragedy if they were discovered. That said, their absence had already lifted the collective intelligence level of the Red Keep, and that was no small matter. Stannis Baratheon was also Hand of the King, and that had changed much as well. The man was annoyingly direct and had all the tact of an arrow in the eye, but he was younger than Aaron and more energetic, and he was annoyingly good at being Hand. It was almost peculiar. He ignored the game and dealt with the players directly and bluntly. A small shape entered from a dark doorway and handed him a small scroll before vanishing the way that he or she had come. He unrolled it and read it carefully, his eyes widening as he did so. Damn it, another thing that had gone wrong. He stood and rang the bell. When one of his servants appeared in the main door, he waved a hand at him. Tell Captain Waters to prepare his fastest ship at once. I need to leave for Pentatos on the first tide. The servant left, and he threw what was left in his cup down his throat. Damn it all. He should have guessed that this would happen. Gendry. He liked making sides. They had been a challenge to make it first, but after he had been taught the knack of getting the curve just right, he'd soon gotten used to them. According to Mikken, they needed as many as he could make for the gift and new gift. That said, he needed a new project. He'd made the helmets, and he'd made the new knife for Lord Stannis. Now he needed something else to work on. Perhaps a new warhammer. The one he was training with had been his father's, but he felt awkward with it at times. It still felt as if it wasn't his. Not yet. The scythe was finished, and he placed it carefully to one side, before walking to the door to the courtyard. Mikken was still sitting there, puzzling over the broken cage that had arrived that morning from some place called Harlhome, or Hardhome, or something like that. The problem was that it was made of no metal that he recognized. The First Men made these, but the First Men could not use iron. Not then, Mikken muttered to him. But this isn't bronze, or copper, or anything like that. What the bloody hell is it? I don't know, Master, Gendry replied as he peered at it himself. He needed to stick his head in a bucket to wash the sweat off. It looks odd. Lad, I'm not your master, and you're a fine enough smith as it is. There's little enough I can teach you. Master Mott used to say that there's always something new to learn. That cage for a start. Mikken snorted with amusement and then nodded before looking around the courtyard. Something's up. Confused. Gendry looked about as well. He couldn't see anything wrong. How do you know? No red cloaks strutting about with their noses in the air. What you can see of them with those daft helmets of theirs. Gendry looked about again. The Smith of Winterfell was right. No red cloaks at all. Then he heard boots approaching, and looked over to see Sir Roderick Castle and his nephew striding towards him. Ruxalad, His Grace wants to see you. Gendry gaped at him, and then looked at his own clothes, which were still stained with sweat. Now, I've been at the forge since this morning. I'm hardly in a fit state to see the king. The Castles looked him up and down, issued almost identical sniffs, and then looked at each other. I've still got to get the terrible threesome in from their riding lesson with Lord Domeric, Jari Castle said eventually. The lad's got time for a scrub and a clean shirt. Aye, if he runs. Go on then, lad. Meet us in the Great Hall. He ran back to his room and thanked the gods for the hot water that ran through the walls. It was all a bit odd having access to hot water so easily, but he blessed the fact that he could scrub himself to get rid of the accumulated sweat and forge dirt so quickly. He was also getting used to the fact that he didn't have to wash his own clothes anymore. A scrub, a wipe, new clothes, an attempt at wetting down his rebellious hair, and then he was off again, heading back to the Great Hall. Rosier Caxel was waiting at the doors, and he nodded at him. In you go, lad. They're just waiting for a few others. Inside, he was surprised to see Lord Stannis and Shireen, along with Edric and the tall, lanky girl that looked disconcertingly like him. Maye! Lord Stark was talking to his father and Sir Barristan Salmi, and he stopped dead. The king had a look on his face that did not bode well at all. A look of anger and worry and, oddly enough, dread. He also had Stormbreaker in his hands, with the tip of the big sword on the stone flagstones. As he recovered and walked in, Shireen beamed and waved at him, whilst the others nodded or just looked at him. "Your Grace," Gendry said, eventually, and rather hesitantly. "You sent for me?" "Aye," said the king, with a smile and a nod of the head. "I did. Sit down, Gendry. We're just waiting for a few others." He sat and waited, and after a few minutes, the doors opened again, and his other brothers and sister entered, escorted by Sandor Clegane, a man who still scared the shit out of him. Clegane seemed a bit edgy, looking about the place suspiciously, but after he saw Shireen and Edric he seemed to relax a little, and behind him came Maester Luwin. "Father," Joffrey cried as soon as he saw the king. "What's this nonsense about Mother being arrested? What's happened? Is she ill or something?" Then he noticed Gendry and the others. "And what are they doing here? The bastards?" "Oh, it's or something," the king muttered as he stood up. "Right, yes, your mother's under arrest. It's treason, children, and it's a long story. But there's something important we need to work out first." There was a pause, and then Tommen and Myrcella both burst into tears, whilst Joffrey looked baffled. As for Clegane, his eyes narrowed as he looked at the king, who eyed him back. "Clegane, your grace." "Who are you sworn to?" "You, your grace." "Who do you obey?" The hound stiffened at this. "You, your grace." "Then remove your hand from the pommel of that sword. We will talk later." The king looked back at the crying children and muttered something under his breath. "All right, it's all right. Children, your mother's just confined to a new room. I'll explain everything later. Now, dry those eyes because this is important." Tommen and Myrcella slowly stopped crying and instead frowned slightly as Stannis pulled out what looked like one of Micken's hammers. Meanwhile, Father unsheathed Stormbreaker and took the hammer from his brother and then looked around, before frowning slightly. "It's just Stormbreaker, Joffrey. It's not going to bloody bite you." Then he looked at them all. "Now, you all have a piece of parchment and piece of charcoal with you all." Gendry looked about frowning and then noticed that there was indeed a piece of parchment on a table next to him. A glance about him revealed that the others also had the same. "As I said, this is important, odd but important. I'm going to tap Stormbreaker with this hammer. I want you all to listen very carefully and then write down what it sounds like. Don't say out loud, just write it down. And yes, Joffrey, you are to do the same. This affects you too, so just listen." His father struck the sword, and Gendry closed his eyes at the beautiful chiming sound that echoed around the room, before opening his eyes and taking up the charcoal so that he could carefully write chime on the parchment, sticking the tip of his tongue out as he wrote. Having written it, he peered at it worriedly. His penmanship was not very good, but the word could be read clearly. "Joffrey, bring me what you have written," the king barked, gesturing at the gold-headed boy impatiently. Joffrey smirked for no reason that Gendry could discern and swaggered over to his father, with the look of someone who is doing something ridiculous, before handing over his parchment. The king took the paper, read it, and then his shoulders slumped a little. "A loud, stupid clank, Joffrey has written." "That's what I heard," Joffrey scoffed before sitting down and starting to inspect his nails. "What is all this nonsense about?" "Be silent, boy," the king hissed as he gave the parchment to Maester Luwin, and Joffrey looked up, startled, before turning more than a little pale. The king turned to Tommen and gave him a strange smile. "Tommen, bring me what you wrote." Tommen hesitantly walked over and held out his parchment, and the king smiled and tousled the boy's hair as he took it. "A clank, Tommen, has written," down came his shoulders again. "Thank you, lad. Back to your place. Myrcella, yours now." The girl strode up and handed her piece of parchment over. The king peered at it and then smiled a little, even as his shoulders slumped a little further. "A dolorous clank," according to Myrcella. "That's stupid," Joffrey laughed. "Dolorous. There's no such word." This seemed to pain Shireen, who made a face and then sighed. "Yes," she said heavily, "there is such a word. It means mournful or distressing," Edric piped up, before Joffrey turned on him with a snarl. "Silence, bastard," Joffrey hissed. "Don't you—" "Joffrey," everyone froze. The king was standing, his face red with fury. "You will not insult Edric." Joffrey subsided, looking cowed, and the king stood there for a long moment, glaring at his son before looking at Gendry. "Gendry, bring me yours." He obeyed. What in the seven hells was going on, but suddenly aware that he was suddenly on very uncertain ground. The king looked at it. Chime, Gendry writes. He looked at him and Gendry had the oddest feeling that he was being very closely examined for the first time. Nonsense, Joffrey roared. Chime? How can a sword chime? It's impossible. You've done it now, bastard. You have lied to your king and your prince and... Joffrey, the king said, the word in a way that was both flat and final. He did not shout it, he did not hiss it, he just said it, and silence followed. Sit down, Edric, give me yours. A pale Edric handed his over. A chime Edric has written. Maya, let me see yours. The girl from the Vale handed hers over with a shaking hand. Their father smiled briefly as he read it. My girls are wordier than my boys, it seems. A gorgeous chime that went straight through me, Maya writes. The king closed his eyes and sighed, and there was a long pause as everyone stared at him. Finally, he opened his eyes again. Joffrey, Tommen, Myrcella, you'd best go back to your rooms. I will be along soon to explain things. To explain everything. Off you go. The three went, followed by Sandor Clegane, whose eyes were suddenly very wide and who seemed to almost have something on the tip of his tongue for a moment before shrugging and going out the door. Gendry wandered over to an equally wide-eyed Shireen. What just happened? I heard a chime, she said in a stunned voice. All those with the blood of the Durrandons of Storm's End heard a chime. But that can't be right. The king's children didn't hear it. She nodded at his words and then peered owlishly at him until the pieces clattered together in his mind. The queen had been arrested for treason. He felt his own eyes go wide, and then he saw that Edric and Mania had the same look on their faces. Oh shit.